So the Ag Labor Housing Task Force, if you're not aware, is a task force, an interagency task force being put together by the governor to address ag labor housing and the shortages of it. It's made up, every agency that's there, and I can probably tell you what all the main agencies that are there are. Each agency has sent a representative to discuss the status and role they play in ag labor housing. Some of the departments that are there, the Department of Agriculture, the Employment Department, or OSHA, building codes. There is, I can't remember what department, but it's a fire chief or an assistant fire chief. BOLI is there. Health Authority is there. Oregon Water Resources is there. DEQ is there. ODHS is there. And then obviously OHCS is there. I believe that's all the major agencies that are attending. And the purpose, as I said, is, to look at the state of ag labor housing. And basically there's two pieces, two kind of key buckets that group is going to be focusing on. One is a compliance piece. So like attending this initial meeting was the first week of June. The next meeting is next week, next Friday. There's kind of a smattering of enforcement across all those agencies. Obviously, when we think about ag labor housing, we think OSHA kind of at the forefront of our mind. But a lot of these agencies have some sort of compliance piece, even if it's not, they don't have like an enforcement mechanism. And those recommendations for compliance are going to be due October 1st. The other piece that is probably of great interest to the people in this meeting is the capital/investment recommendation. So for November 1st, we are going to have to submit a policy option to the governor for funding. So to increase capital and increase the chance of developing more ag labor housing. So obviously, of all the agencies I mentioned, we are the only ones that have anything to do with the funding of ag labor housing. While obviously I cannot see the future and I can't tell you what's going to happen with any guarantee, I strongly suspect that we are going to see a probably significant investment into the either ag worker housing tax credit or some sort of additional supplemental funding mechanism to try and kickstart some additional ag labor housing. The other big piece about this, and this is something some of our community advocates I want you to think about, and I might come back and have a separate engagement with you, is we will probably, after we meet as a big group a couple times, we'll probably be doing like working groups. And one of the ideas is that we is bringing in both growers as well as workers themselves. Obviously, I don't need to go into detail because you all know much better than me the difficulty and the fear that is associated with an ag laborer coming to any sort of state agency or any sort of task force, having people who know who they are and giving candid kind of feedback and information. So I know that one of the flags I raised, just so everyone is aware, is I was trying to figure out what the budget for this task force is, so that because I said there's no way we can engage the actual labor unless we're paying them, we're providing some sort of child care. There has to be something additional there, whereas I don't think that's necessarily as big of a barrier for the growers. So one of the ideas that was kind of floated was was potentially using kind of community groups or advocates to kind of bring the voice of the worker to the table. Obviously, that's a better alternative than nothing, but my preference, and one of the things I'll continue to kind of push with this group is that we try and figure out how to get the voice of the workers directly at the table. So I'm trying to see. So that's kind of like the rough overview. Like I said, we've only had one meeting up to this point. But and again, maybe some people here know better than me. I don't know when the last time there was a task force, a governor's task force on ag labor housing. I don't know when the next time there will be. So I view this as very much an opportunity to kind of strike while the iron is hot and while there's interest. And that, you know, all of our kind of community partners and advocates really lean into this process and ensure it's as equitable as we can have it be. Yeah, Lori.
Hi, Tim and everybody. This is Lori from Legal Aid Services, and I guess I was just wondering is in regards to the capital investment, would that include community-based housing in addition to improvements for on-farm housing?
Yeah, at this time, there's no, we're looking at both. I talked about during the meeting, the ag worker housing tax credit, what it covers, both its use as community and farm-based housing. And so my assumption is that we would just see an overall increase to the budget and bucket. Nothing has been discussed about this is only going to be on farm or this is only going to be community based. So that's kind of a non-answer, but my working assumption is that both groups would have hopefully see a significant increase to the funding available to them. Other questions? Does anyone else have any other questions about that? Karen, yeah.
Are the meetings open to the public?
So the first one was actually, it was open to the public. The second one might be, I'm not sure, but I can find out. I do know it's next Friday. So yeah, I will look reach out to the person who's running it to see. Sorry, I got distracted. I will reach out to the person who's running point on the program to see if the rest of the meetings will be open to the public. But I know the first one was open to the public and had public comments.
Would you notify us then?
Yes. So I will make a note today. Sorry, I'm just writing myself a note. Person running it is a guy named Lou Savage. If anyone is interested, I believe he knows you, Lori, and worked at Legal Aid Oregon or Legal Set. So that is who is running point on this. All right, next, who is next? Meg.
Tim, anybody else besides you is invited from this group to be part of that group?
No. So at this point, only state agencies were invited, and only one member of each state agency. So I think probably because I lead the Ag Worker Housing Facilitation Team, I was asked by OHCS, but no other OHCS staff, no members of the public have given input to be on the task force. It's at this point, it's just an interagency task force. All right, Rosie.
Hi, so I have a couple of questions. Thanks again for all that update information. Regarding you said you're going to be put together working groups or worker groups. How are we going to ensure, or I'm sure you guys are going to figure this out, But when you're going to be inviting workers, actual for agriculture workers to participate in the meetings, how are they going to be, how are we going to make them feel comfortable where they're actually able to share their real thoughts and opinions without feeling afraid?
So that's that, as I mentioned at the beginning, that's like a real barrier. I'm very aware of it. So I think we're going to be having discussions about that. I know, and this isn't like we're going to do this 100%, but I know Oregon OSHA has said they've had some success with their listening sessions, kind of throughout the state. I don't know anything about those, so I can't comment on those, but they've had like worker listening sessions. Um, but, I would say very much if you have recommendations on how you might want to see that done, or you have models, um, share them with me. I'm more than happy to bring it to the wider group. Um, you know, I do view, I think most of us or all of us can represent or recognize the kind of power imbalance when it comes to growers versus farm workers. Um, and the difficulty in making them feel comfortable bringing their voice and concerns and their thoughts to the table, and kind of speaking truth to power. So I think that is going to be something we discuss at our meeting next Friday. Um, so yeah, uh, as we get further down to closer to doing that kind of engagement, I'm more than happy to bring it up during future meetings like this, or if you want to follow up with me for a one-on-one, I'm more than happy to kind of talk about where we're at or kind of what decisions have been made. But um, I made it very clear during this meeting about the importance of the actual workers being able to give input. Um, I'm just laughing because I was thinking or OSHA was there, so I kind of grilled them a little bit on some ag labor housing stuff. So I was kind of just remembering, like, I probably should have been a little nicer. So yeah, other questions, Karen, Karen and,
Sorry, I
oh,
had a
Rosie,
few
yeah,
more.
go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, no, it's fine. And you actually just kind of led on to that one or segue into it, which was basically in the past, there's been issues trying to figure out what agency was going to be responsible to making sure that um, things are being upkept and stuff. Who's going to be responsible for keeping accountability, right? And before we thought it was our OSHA, but I'm not sure if they actually have been able to set up their tracking mechanisms and whatnot. That's one. And then the other question that I have is there's we're talking about increasing the pool for the ag tax credits, which is great. But I know that previously there have been funds that have not been used by the growers, and if this happens in the future, what happens to that money that's been allocated that's not being used that was allocated for for the growers? Does that go back to the general? I mean, does that go for the same pool but a future year, or can it be shared or transfer over to community-based housing?
Yeah, so I think that's something that we're going to discuss. And like I said, I'm not sure if any kind of investment would just expand the pool as is, or if it would be a separate bucket of money. I do think getting more um, growers in different regions of the state to use those funds will probably be a part of this task force. Um, so I can't make any promises. We haven't gotten that far. Um, but like I said, I'm more than happy to keep everyone here kind of up to date where we're at and what we're discussing. And as far as compliance, yeah, like I said, during this meeting, every kind of agency had their own little niche piece of like compliance, right? So like the water resources, has something to do with this, or the fire department has something to do with this little piece, but there's no like, better than me. There's no uniform enforcement mechanism across every agency to cover this. OSHA is probably the the one at the front of our thoughts that and is kind of out in the field the most, but looking at all the pieces that were there, it's not enough. And so I think that's one of our tasks is going to be coming up with some sort of compliance recommendation, or some sort of enforcement recommendation. Because yeah, when you have these complex, pieces of compliance, the people that suffer are the workers. The growers and the owners of the housing obviously don't get caught up when the government is tripping over itself to try and enforce some of these rules. I think it was Karen, then Lori, then Lisa. So unless did you have more questions, Rosie? Okay, Karen, let's go to you.
Have you shared the farm worker housing report with the members of the committee?
So I have not. At this point, and I know I need to get back to everyone. We're still going to do that. We're still going to do the committee report. But I don't have permission to share that report yet. I would like to, but there's always a fear because it's still in draft form that it kind of runs away from us. But yeah, I would like to share it with the committee, but I don't have permission, and at this point in time, I don't have any way to share it yet.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right, Lori.
Well, that was actually going to be part of my question. What is the timeline, or what are the steps that need to happen, I guess, to finalize that?
To share it with the agency, the task force, or to get it published, or both?
I guess both, but I mean, the agency is probably the most important right now and maybe less cumbersome.
So I'm working with my boss, Chelsea. I know we're working with Jamie Stamberger, the consultant who put it together. Basically, we want to make sure it's okay for it to have this kind of limited consumption among agencies, and that it's not going to us going back to the farmers themselves won't have any like negative impacts on the study or kind of radically change anything. But yeah, I obviously view this as a really good opportunity to get this in front of a lot of decision makers, and then, like I said, kind of strike while the iron is hot and try and implement some, hopefully, large policy proposals and capital investments to really address this critical issue in this state. And then as far as I can't remember, what was the second part of your question? Oh, to publish. Okay, sorry. The barriers we're looking at to publishing it is we currently have permission to go out and the funding to go back out to these farmers and run additional couple work groups to get their input on like this final draft version, implement any kind of recommendations or changes they want, and then get it translated. So those are, that's just a pure procurement kind of piece. And as I'll talk about with that Southern Oregon engagement RFP, our procurement team is like absolutely swamped right now. As many of you know, the process of hiring in state government is slow. And that has been one of the slower teams to build up. And with all the additional funding our agency has received, it has made all of our RFPs just much slower, and all of our procurement pieces slower. And quite honestly, mine is a smaller one. So, more than once I've been told, hey, Tim, I got to drop this. I've been pulled to like a more urgent priority RFP, but I'm hoping this next week or so before the end of June to have that out and ready for people to bid on if they feel so inclined. So other questions, Lori?
And I'm sorry, so they're bidding on what needs to go out to procurement?
Oh, this is for I have an RFP a request for proposals that's running for through procurement to do engagement in Southern Oregon
Oh, right.
around. Yeah. So I know it's taken so long. It's it feels like a mythical entity at this point, kind of the Bigfoot of RFPs, but it's real, I promise. And you'll you'll all be able to read about it, hopefully sooner rather than later.
I guess I just was trying to figure out, so how soon do you think we'll be able to get the report finalized?
Oh, I have not heard back or seen an email back. Hold on. Chelsea sent one. Let me find this email real quick. Give me 1 second. So the only thing I see from Chelsea, who emailed earlier this week to the consultant, is that everything has been approved as far as funding and all of that, the proposals to translate and get this stuff back out. But it's waiting on paperwork. So I can follow up and get a more solid, or try and get a more solid response or timeline to get that out. To the group and all the orgs that might be interested. So let me just make a note. Okay. Other questions? Oh, Lori, did you have anything else?
I'll pass it to Lisa.
Okay, Lisa. Oh, and Lori, I feel bad for. Last week was my kindergarten's graduation to first grade, and we were doing it at Bush Park, and I saw who I thought was Lori walking on the sidewalk, but I was like, no, Tim, you've never even seen her in person. Don't say anything. That'd be weird if you're just shouting at a stranger. So I emailed her, and it turns out it was her. So, and she was there for her son's graduation. So wonderful. It was a very fun, almost meeting we had. Lisa.
So, I'm so excited that you are optimistic about a lot more resources coming into building more farm labor housing. But the way if it comes in as ag workforce housing tax credits, it's an effective 35% rate. So it's a 50% credit, and then you have to sell it at a discount, right? So you still are needing to look for 65 to 70% of the funding that's going to be needed for that housing. Are the other programs at OHCS, if you're going to be putting all this money in here, how do you support it with all the other competing interests that you have for your resources to make sure we're actually addressing this issue? Because if we just put it in ag workforce housing tax credits, the farmers will have the biggest use of it, but it won't really be creating a lot more housing unless people are just throwing a few units in here or there to fill the gap in whatever they can't in their own project. And I don't think that's really addressing the needs of ag labor housing or ag laborers, right? Because if you have a farm labor specific housing, you are putting resources to this particular community. And then if you only have 6 units in a 100-unit property, it really doesn't do the same thing. So, has OHCS had any conversations around how you would support this additional focus on ag labor housing?
So I have not, had that discussion yet internally. I've had a couple just very brief conversations with like Mitch and Martin, who kind of are the programmatic experts, especially Martin. And to be totally honest, I don't know if it's all just going to it would be a straight increase to the ag work housing tax credit. I think that's the purpose of those work groups, and getting community advocates or farmers themselves. And I think that's where the role of the community advocate and the farmer don't overlap, right? The farmer or the ag worker, right? The ag worker is not necessarily going to be able to speak to the expertise you have on like addressing that issue of where is that funding going? How is it going to be used for competing resources for community versus farm based? So I think that's where the role of the community advocate is going to be important for some of these work groups. You know, I'm not the expert, even though they made me the, you know, kind of in charge of this. So I very much will rely on the people who've been kind of on the ground doing this type of work for long periods of time. You know, but yeah, I mean, you know, at this point, it's kind of the sky's the limit with how we want to approach it. Maybe they say, let's monetize community-based tax credits, right? Let's throw an extra $30 million. And this is I'm just making this up. These aren't recommendations. These haven't been discussed. I don't want anyone getting their hopes up or not liking the idea. But, you know, we could make the recommendation that we monetize the tax credits, right? And we put an additional one-time $30 million into community-based housing. I don't know, right? That's the purpose of this, is to try and find those actionable recommendations. So again, you know, while I don't necessarily want to run this group as like a parallel to the Ag Labor Housing Task Force for the governor, I do view this group as a way to kind of continue to inject ideas into that wider kind of interagency. So at this point, no, we will have further discussions about that. But, you know, if you have recommendations, once we start this work group, and once we bring out these advocates, I highly recommend you attend and work with it to make sure those ideas are heard, because I think, you know, I don't think the growers will have any trouble getting to the table. And so we absolutely need that kind of balance of how we approach this. That doesn't leave anyone feeling left out or like they got the short end of the stick, right? This is a really good opportunity. So yeah, I hope that's sort of a satisfactory answer. I feel bad now. We've only had one meeting, so I don't have like a ton of like production to share with you, other than just like the first meeting was like, let's introduce ourselves and talk about our agency and long-term, what are the big things we're trying to get out of this. So do you have any other questions, Lisa? Oh.
Maybe more just a comment.
Yeah.
So Lori is very well aware of this too, because we've been working with the OSHA folks about the on-farm conditions and what should be there and what's not there. And it would, unless you increase compliance like you talked about pretty significantly, I would probably not be in favor of pouring more money into the on-farm stuff. They fight against having to do basic improvements that any person that is living in our community right now would consider pretty horrendous, right? So I just want you to know that at least for me, that would be my perspective, because OSHA's job is to make sure the workers are protected, and yet there's this very sensitive way that the farmers are being approached, and there's a certain part of me that just gets a little bit concerned. It's taken years to even get to this place that OSHA is looking at increasing what the rules need to be, and it's like they're tiptoeing around things. And so if all of this additional money is just going to go to support farmers, I'm probably going to have an issue. It may not go anywhere, but I just would probably not be super excited about it, because we have to improve the conditions for farm workers. We just have to.
Yeah, no, and like I said, that's one of the two big things that were talked about as far as it were compliance and the capital investment recommendations. So that's like one of the biggest things that I think we're going to be discussing. I'll share you one of the questions I asked when we were doing introductions. I asked OSHA, how many unregistered farm labor camps do you think are in the state of Oregon? And they were like, well, I don't know. If we knew, we'd investigate and shut them down. And it's kind of like, wait, you can't even give me a rough estimate. So, I followed up with, well, how often do you shut down unauthorized farm labor camps and what are the average fines? And I got pretty much a non-answer. So I'm personally, I ask a lot of questions in these situations, not always to be snarky, but because I just generally don't know. Um, and so, yeah, I think beyond my own concerns about compliance, both with OSHA, as well as my own agency, that's another, I think, important thing for the advocates to be able to bring to the table is to have those discussions and be able to tell, um, while it's always, we have to be careful about telling other people's stories. Like if you have someone's story to tell, like that's the time to be using it, right? Um, and certainly you don't have to worry about, um, like I think myself being an ally, or having kind of those concerns at the front of my thoughts and in my heart. So, yeah, um, compliance will be a big piece and the enforcement, right? I think that's the big piece is enforcement, right? It's like, compliance is whatever, but if we need to be able to enforce those pieces with like results that are going to be meaningful. So, okay, I can't remember who raised their hand next. Was it Lori or was it Lori? Not Meg? Meg, was it you?
Go ahead,
Well,
Meg.
thank you, Lori. Just following up what Lisa say, first, I think the first thing that we all in this group share is that uh, infant labor housing shouldn't even exist. It is not right to have people living in for the person that is giving the job, because they live on fear. They are everything that they are attached to this person that is giving them a job. So they will never say anything against fund labor housing because, well, they are being hired by these people. So I very much in Lisa's same position. There is no regulations. It is incredible the amount of regulation that we as a providers of affordable housing, farm worker housing get, and all the restrictions that we get. I mean, it's incredible. And they just, they are loose. So I definitely support some kind of a statement from this group, some kind of support that you need, team, in that group. I would love to, and I know it has been just a first meeting for you, so but if you can in the next meeting, you can give us a more clear understanding of what is the goal of that group, what they want to accomplish, um, what are the accomplishments, or what they are their goals of going out there and talking to people living in those housing, because we have talked to them already. We have done so many studies that, let's not, I hope that you can make this group something more meaningful that going back to them and asking the same question, because people get tired and they're scared too.
No, absolutely. I know um, it can be kind of a exhausting process, to be a member of that community and have multitudes of agencies come out and ask for your time, ask for your energy and effort, and to see things not change in any significant way or a way that you fundamentally can kind of see on a day-to-day basis. Um, you know, Obviously I am not a big decision maker. I am a mere bureaucrat, but I hold the same kind of thought in myself in that, um, are we as an agency or as a task force going to make, the kind of maybe um, radical recommendations that are going to result in significant quality of life improvements for our workers. So it's also, I won't say this process itself, but, I also think, historically, as a country and as agencies of the state or the federal government, they love to have things be data driven, right? And I think we're slowly coming to the idea of like data justice and maybe kind of the inherent kind of racism and that is associated with like constant surveys, trying to justify programs instead of just like listening to the community, right? If someone tells you their house is on fire, you don't need to do a study of them and all their neighbors to talk about like their living conditions, right? You need to call a fire department. So, yeah, I do have good feelings that we can achieve some good stuff with this, you know, and yeah. I hope that kind of answers your question. I feel like I'm getting very soapboxy right now, so my apologies if I am. And then Karen, I saw your question. I didn't mean to ignore it. So we had to pause that just for a brief second. I'm hoping before the end of the month I can send out another doodle poll and get started with that. So that regardless of what happens with the Ag Labor Housing Task Force, at least internally at OHCS, we can use some potential policy recommendations to kind of guide and do some additional program design. Lori, do you have another question?
Yeah, and I just want to kind of add onto what Meg was saying. I think that, in terms of being data driven, we have this report, right, that describes, I think, quite well what the problems are. And the data that we actually need now is from the growers in regards to, how many labor camps have well water, how many are on town water, how many have, certain kind of structural, what's their, in some ways, the requests have been saying, right, that there's not enough electricity to give air conditioning to everyone. Well, we need to know then, right, what is the electricity setup of different housing? And I would say that, I hope that there are resources to hire, experts in regards to water quality, electricity, sewage systems, and economists to kind of measure the costs. But again, I guess the other thing I just want to state is that, I'm glad, they're looking at compliance and enforcement, but we need to recall what Lisa was saying is that right now we're in the process with OSHA to strengthen the standards, right? The standards haven't been strengthened for decades. And there's a recognition that strengthening needs to happen. And so I'm hopeful that is definitely, it's unclear kind of how the OSHA process is going to connect with this task force, but people have been waiting a very long time for those standards to get strengthened.
Yeah, absolutely. After that last OSHA meeting, they had me stick around for like 45 minutes to talk with me about kind of their engagement. Yeah, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't necessarily, I shouldn't say that. I don't like the speed of which OSHA does those policy changes or makes those changes. So I'm more than happy where I can to kind of push them internally. I think, I can't remember if it was at the beginning of this year when I talked about, we had made those changes to the Ag Warehousing Tax Credit application, asking about how far away are you from the fields, what kind of bathroom facilities, what kind of kitchen facilities. I think were on those lists that you all had recommended. And taking into account those recommendations and trying to implement them kind of unilaterally is something I'm more than happy to do if I feel we can't get other agencies where they might need to be as far as what their rules are or compliance. I think I had talked about after we run this current model for like a year, then I might want to start scoring those applications, right? Based off of those questions, those additional kinds of questions we asked, you know, so that we can try and get at least some of the growers who are more intent on developing better housing, kind of give them that kind of edge as far as securing those on-farm dollars. But it's also, it's a constantly evolving process, right? As things change and evolve, such as the air conditioning piece, I'm more than happy to continue to push and change the ag worker housing tax credit to better serve our workers. So yeah, no, it's again, my background has always been kind of community organizer, campaign person, union work. And so going at this pace of government is a very kind of a shift for me, and I'm still having to get used to what I see as urgent priorities, seemingly taking a very methodical approach by the government. But I do feel that there is sort of that desire, especially the fact that this task force has been put together, that there is a desire to try and address it head on in a meaningful way. And I'm glad that we're going to be able to play that role, hopefully, kind of as the most relevant agency to address the issue, I feel, or one of the most relevant, that we'll be able to make sure some of these voices at this meeting are amplified, when we start doing these like work groups and getting the community and the growers involved. Other questions, Lori? Your hand's still up. Do you have more questions?
No, I mean, I guess, yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. And as always, everyone here has standing invitations if you want to have a one-on-one with me, or if you want to follow up and ask kind of in the weeds questions or things like that. That's my job. That's my role. I always enjoy hearing from all of you, and your passion helps reignite my own passion and kind of drive. So, okay, are there any other questions about this Ag Labor Housing Task Force? All right, seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to Southern Oregon Engagement RFP. So at the beginning of the year, at the end of last year, I had been in talks with a couple of groups and organizations, the Ag Worker Housing Facilitation Team, to talk about engaging Southern Oregon farm workers, specifically Latino, Latinx, around housing, services, and their needs. And that is been running since January through our RFP, our procurement process. It's an RFP, a request for proposals. I have looked at a final rough draft that was last week. And so I believe either next week or the week after that, we will be ready to publish. It'll be a pretty typical RFP. I won't be the lead on it. So once it gets published, I can't answer questions on it. It'll be Lisa Semino who's running Point, if any of you have ever worked with her before. But I think it'll be a really good opportunity to kind of engage around what services do we have, how well do the communities that we're trying to serve, how well do they understand these services, and are they connected to them? Where do we need to make up ground? Where do we need to do more investments, whether it's with community organizations or whatnot, to better expand our reach to those groups, and get them the services that we provide and that they need. Lisa.
So I don't know if you're aware of a lot of the work that Rosie in particular has been doing in Southern Oregon about the COVID study, the farm worker housing study, the engagement process that we're already going through with a lot of the folks down there. And I think Rosie can obviously speak way more intelligently to all of this, but there's already been quite a bit of work that's being done down there. And was there any consideration to tap into that?
So this is like an RFP. So like it's.
I get it, but I mean, a lot of work has already been done. So
Yeah.
is it that you're looking to continue that level of engagement? It was pretty intensive. And if
Yeah.
that's what you're doing, okay, that's great. But I think it's taken a long time to come out, and a lot of work has already been completed.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate if, I know that the original timeline for this was like March, right? So it's, I know I've talked to like Peter on a couple occasions about that Southern Oregon work. In the last discussion, I know, um, I think the timing was there was some sort of engagement starting this month, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong. I thought he had mentioned something about that. Um, I also, I think, well, I will double check. I know we have some programs, some proposed, some RFP type stuff, some funding mechanisms where if you've been doing the work and you go out for the RFP, you can get reimbursed for the work you've done. So we're doing, like, for example, we've gotten a bunch of homeless sheltering dollars for our 9 federally recognized tribes. Um, and so they're going to be able to start, even though we haven't released the funding to them, they're able to do look backs for the past year, and anything they've spent in those areas that we're funding, they're going to be able to get reimbursements for, even if they've already spent it. So I can clarify with that. But the difficulty is, if like the funding isn't there, we can't like direct awarding like significant amounts of money is just, it's so difficult. And the process is not any faster. If that was like the thought of like, oh, we should just let's give CASA this money for this engagement we're doing.
Let me go ahead and interrupt. That wasn't the point. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm not, but there's a lot of money right now that's going to Southern Oregon in order to build back what has been lost, right? And I don't think anybody says that that's a bad thing. The problem is that by the time you're going to do an RFP that comes out in October or whenever it is, and then by then all the money that's going to the housing that's been set aside is already done. So I'm not trying to be mean. I really am not. I'm trying to say maybe rather than doing that, take some of the work that's already been done, use that to inform what needs are out there rather than going through yet another RFP that by the time you get the information back, there's no money to do anything. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, if the message to me and OHCS is don't spend money, I don't think that's a problem. I can stop the RFP. But
No, don't worry. We still want the money in some other fashion, but maybe to support some of the development. I don't know. I am but one voice on this, so I would prefer if other people had
All right, let
something
me just
better.
chime in. We do have the studies that Lisa has mentioned. There's actually multiple phases of it, and they're pretty in-depth, and they're also put together by, we do have an RB for each for them, and also put together with a collaboration of academics. So we'll be happy to share that with you. One of the things that I think Lisa's trying to be cognizant of is that people have already been through a lot of trauma, and they're going through a lot of things, and having been multiple, having more people go out there and ask the same questions, it's not gonna help them better or any faster. Since we already have that information, we'll be happy to share that with you. And maybe if you still need to put something together, you can use that to kind of help form what additional information you're needing, right? The other thing is that it's already been 2 years since the wildfires, and this community, particularly the Latinx community and agriculture workers, are the people that have been less served. They are still living in undercrowded, under overcrowded conditions. They're living in garages. They're still being refused lodging from hotels, even though there's other nonprofits that says here's a voucher to pay for your rooming. They're still, they're being denied that service because they work in agriculture. So if there's any way that we can help speed up the resources of that to provide the housing and the actual needs that they to serve the needs that they need right now, then that would be a lot better than trying and prolong it and try and figure out what else what else is needed. I'm sorry, I'm not speaking correctly right now, but the other thing is that there is some funding that is going to be available for homeownership, right? Particularly to purchase a house for individuals in Southern Oregon. And I'm not sure if I'm phrasing it correctly, but has this task force or has anybody thought about how we are going to make sure that that funding is trickled down to the agricultural community down there? Because if there's, how are we going to make sure that they are able to access, the applications are able to get the funding needed to help purchase the houses so they can rebuild their life?
Do you know which program or what the name of that program is?
Oh, it's an acronym that Peter always says all the time, Lisa.
Is it the DRBG, the Disaster Recovery Block Grant?
Yeah, that one, and it's in a
Okay.
draft format.
So I believe haven't they started. So that's in a that's in a completely kind of separate section from me that I don't do a ton of engagement with. But haven't they started community like listening sessions? Have those already started? You might know better than me because I think the meetings I've attended, I thought they had already engaged some of the tribes, I think. Have they not engaged like the wider community on the allocation or anything like that?
I haven't seen any particular engagement specifically to the Latinx population or BIPOC populations.
Okay.
Or sorry, aside from the Native tribes, I haven't seen anything for the any outreach to agriculture workers.
Okay.
And Fort
Yeah.
Worker Housing has been part of the same study that Rosie and CASA has been doing. We try to go to South Oregon due to our lack of capacity. We couldn't help or even, spend any of our small capacity to go to South Oregon. We have the interest because in early time in this problem, we saw the need down there. And the need is big because, and I feel that this is a safe space. There is not support for the Latinx community down there. Housing Authority is trying to do some work, but I don't think they have a good understanding of the BIPOC and Latinx community, and we were open to help. I have to go and go back for what Lisa say about, we have been in this situation for 2 years already. I myself have engaged with several conversations with not just with CASA but other people in South Oregon, and this is so difficult to get into, into any space there. I was expecting, seriously, this is me being naive. I was expecting, Meg, FHDC wanna build, wanna help us with it? Here is the land, get it, do it. engage with, another housing developer provider like CASA and start doing this, start taking care of this community. We should have that like any other communities, that they don't ask, they don't go through a process of, oh no, you have to go for this money and apply for all this. I think the housing authority should have a, kind of like a procedure when emergencies like this happen. I'm not saying that we should always happen, but when emergencies like this happen, how is that our communities are not served? It's inhumane, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're not wrong. As far as, and you all may have this email, I'm gonna copy and paste part of the email that talks about and I got it wrong, it's the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Action Plan. And it says, yeah, if you've all seen this email, my apologies. This is only part of the email, but in it, they explicitly state that they looked at low and moderate income fire survivors, as well as the plan was drafted with an explicit concern for the needs of the Latina, Latinx community of Jackson County. I don't know what that looks like. This is just an email. I have not been involved in that engagement process, obviously, or else we would have had a lot more discussions and had a lot more money to spread around. So my recommendation is go check out the website, get signed up. I will try and get my hands on a draft copy of this, because I think what ends up happening is we have to put this plan together, then we send it to HUD, and HUD says, yeah, you can spend the money on that stuff. I don't think it's I'm not an expert on what that process is, but from my experience, that's probably what is happening, because it's a lot of it is just federal funding, or it's all federal funding. So yeah, I will check in, and I might even try for the next AWHFT housing facilitation meeting we do. Maybe I'll try and get someone from that team to come talk about what their process was and kind of how they're going to ensure that the ag worker in the Latino community that was kind of disproportionately affected by this is kind of at the front of that line to receive these services. So yeah, I can commit to doing that for our next meeting, and doing a little bit more digging on our end.
Thank you. Sorry, I just need to also add and make sure that the studies or reports has been done in collaboration with a lot of the partners that we have here in the facilitation team, like FHTC and also Lori, just to kind of name a few. There's people we're from being a star. So it's from 15 different organizations that have gotten themselves together to try and address these needs.
Perfect. Okay. Is that happening under like a larger umbrella organization, or is it happening under CASA? All these groups have been engaged.
CASA is a fiscal sponsor, but we are working in collaboration with academics or professors from the U of O, University of Oregon, and OSU, right?
Okay.
And we're also it's also kind of a tri-state effort that we are working with California and Washington as well.
Okay. Yeah. Like I said, I think I have a little homework to do on this end, as far as to get some of those answers. Okay. Let's see. Does anyone else want to talk about any of the Southern Oregon engagement or this Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Action Plan? I feel like I get a workout just saying that full name. If not, okay. So I might wait on the ag worker housing tax credit, because I feel like that's going to be a heavily discussed piece, the putting that in the small projects NOFA. So I think it was Lori or Lisa or both of you wanted to talk about the OSHA kind of committees. So is there anything in particular? I only attended, for everyone here, I only attended my first one, I think it was like 2 weeks ago. And I've been told that I should attend because they run those kind of parallel, right? Both the advocate and growers, with not a lot of engagement between the two. And I know I kind of advocated for some more kind of mixed engagement. But I guess I want to hear all your thoughts or your concerns about that process, and if there's anything you think OHCS can do to further kind of push our fellow state agencies.
I think I'm going to leave it mostly to Lori about, because she can articulate this way better than I can. I will say the reason why we have not, that we're not working together like you would like, is because it gets really ugly really fast. And it's not productive. And once again, I will go back to that concept that the government is sitting there supporting the farmers way more than they are supporting the ag laborers. And somehow or another, that just rings untrue to me. Every other community, if you're going to build housing, whether it's in the county or whether it's in a jurisdiction, you have to build to a certain code. And nothing about these farm worker units would meet any code whatsoever. And it's okay. And that's not okay, in my opinion. It's just not okay. And, like I say, Lori knows way more about the specific things that can be changed and that we're working on to get done. But just the concept that we have to have these conversations and tiptoe around farmers who are treating people inhumanely seems wrong at every level to me.
Yeah, no, I think there's always some, and I think I mentioned this in the meeting, there's always a benefit to having kind of those internal discussions with just advocates or just growers. My fear, and obviously I'm new to this or OSHA process, but in my experience, there is always that danger of when you do that, and then you kind of convene to be like, okay, how are we going to implement this, or what changes are we going to make? Groups are so far apart that the status quo wins out, right? Kind of paralyzed by decision-making processes. And I would say it's for me, while the goal is always to improve housing, right? Increase the standard of living for those growers or those workers, and provide them the opportunities for like home ownership, right? Ultimately, that's I think what everyone wants is for everyone to be able to own their own home. At the end of the day, the growers are who we have to work with, right? There's nothing we can do to change that. I think in my experience working with groups that are kind of clashing, it's that understanding that you can't change the hand you were dealt. You can't change who's on the other side, just as they can't change who they're going up against as far as rule advisories or rule changes. So I did tell OSHA that I would be willing to kind of help facilitate when they do those combined meetings. Because I do, not to toot my own horn very much, but I do have experience with that, and I do think I overall have a fairly calming presence when it comes to these kinds of discussions. But in a way that can kind of drive the discussion to a meaningful way. So yeah, I'll just end with that, and then Lori, do you want to kind of lead off? Lori Hafer.
I'm sorry, I had to just step aside. Where are we? What are we doing?
You just heard me give the most inspiring speech of all time. Everyone here was giving me a round of applause. It was Hollywood-esque. So that's your bad for missing it. No, we were just waiting for you to kind of weigh in, that I had just attended that first OSHA committee. And that I kind of wanted you to weigh in about your thoughts, how OHCS can kind of push where needed, or what kind of additional role or support you might need in those meetings.
I think some of it, I think your presence is very helpful. I think that some of it is just, moving it forward, right? Like having this where we're meeting once a month and just, you know what I mean, tackling a very tiny piece of it. And I think the other thing is that is having OSHA state, kind of like what Meg was saying, what its vision is, what its objectives are, what its goals are. And then I think also that collecting of information is critical. But I also then feel like, and not just kind of going through the existing rules is kind of like it's just tinkering with it, but it's more of taking, what's needed to have workers be safe and healthy in regards to kitchens, and talk about, what are the bottom lines, like Lisa's talking about, what are the other entities and the standards that they have for that, what are the minimum, and not just minimum, but what are, what's needed to keep workers safe and healthy in regards to bathrooms, in regards to water. And I think if we had kind of a tighter timeline, and I do think that, I think many people who are participating have visited many labor camps and heard many workers speaking, but I do think creating also an opportunity for workers to talk about, the details of their safety is critical.
Yeah, no, when we met, for the ag labor housing, one of the questions I kind of was proposing to a lot of the agencies is, how does this information get disseminated? And like, what is the process for like receiving complaints, and like, how are you, like, what does the enforcement piece look like? Like, what triggers for OSHA, like a site visit? What is the process to make sure an anonymous report stays anonymous and so there's no retaliation? So, for me, I think the challenge, at least personally, is for me to find a way to weave this kind of goal and this drive between this task for this facilitation team, the ag labor housing facilitation, and this OSHA, right? It's finding what are those threads that we can pull through all of them to kind of make it a priority, a bigger priority, or more likely to see the kind of changes that we want to see happen for the housing. So no, I'm more than happy though to kind of keep pushing and continue to attend those. What is the timeline? I think they mentioned it once, but I can't remember. Is there a deadline for recommendations for that group, the OSHA one, Lori or Lisa?
I guess, oh, go ahead, Lori, because I think you might know. I don't.
I don't know. I don't think we've been given a timeline, so that's a concern.
It is
Okay.
a big.
So one of the things then, another thing I will do is I will follow up with, I think it's Sarah facilitates those, Sarah Rue. I will follow up with her today, get those find out just for myself when those meetings are, and then find out what the timeline is. And again, that's something I can share. I'll be able to share with you, or the next time it happens, we can all ask. But yeah, that's that's always a concern, having meetings like that with no discernible like deadline for recommendations or like policy proposals. So okay, because that's not like this facilitation, right? That's not an ongoing continuous engagement, or is it?
Well, you mean the OSHA stuff?
Yeah, the OSHA stuff. Is that like where we just do this
Well,
for eternity, or?
No, they have to implement some new rules, and it's just
Okay.
this back and forth on what will they accept. And we're just trying to, this is how sad our conversations have to be. You have these list of things that Lori and Nargis and everybody have really lined out very effectively. And we sit there saying, okay, well, if you can't actually get a bathroom in a unit, we have this minimum standard that we want lighting between the unit and where the bathroom is, and it can't be a porta potty. That's where we've gotten to. And it's like, wow. Like, I don't even like going to like big events where you have to go to a porta potty. I'm like, you know what I mean? And yet people have to live this way. They take a little kid who has to go to the bathroom. You got to get them there in the first place, and it's dark. And then you have a porta potty that's not even lit. And you know, how does the kid not even fall through? You know what I mean? I may be over exaggerating some stuff here. I don't think so though. But we're at that level, and it's just depressing, you know. And that you get pushback, you know. Oh well, I don't know how we would be able to maintain 80 degrees inside. Holy shit! Excuse me. I'm sorry, but these folks have been out in the field in over 100-degree temperatures all day long, and you're saying, oh, we don't want to, it's too expensive, we can't do our business if we have to cool them down to someplace like 80 degrees. It's beyond me that they can have an argument. And yet this is where we sit. And OSHA, who is supposed to be the entity that protects these workers who have no voice, because the reality is whatever documentation they gave to that farmer, the farmer took knowing it wasn't solid because they want a worker. It's like indentured servitude. It is really depressing. And that we sit there and say, well, you know, we need to get together and talk to these guys and get them to come around. And I know you're trying to do the stick and carrot thing by getting funding for them, so maybe they can go ahead and improve it. But if there's no compliance to that, that's like who's living in that housing that's being paid for by the workforce housing tax credits? We don't know, because there's nobody that goes out and checks, right? I just feel like I'm tired because it's been so long and nothing changes. It's like, who are we as a community and as a people that we say this is okay? Sorry, I'll get off my little rant right now, but it's hard for me sometimes in these meetings, and I so appreciate Lori and Argus because they stay calm and they give the facts and they show what needs to happen, and it still doesn't go anywhere. And it's like, wow.
No, I always appreciate those kinds of moments. Very much kind of gut check of like, why are we doing what we do? And you know, I would say that when it comes to that kind of stuff, and I'm going to speak to you from wearing my community activist, community organizer hat, that you know, it is important, even if it feels like the progress isn't happening at the speed you want, or if no progress is happening, because the other side will continue to exist and advocate for their own best interests, always, for the end of time, right? And it's depressing, right? When I did environmental work, we called it forever work, because we're not going to get to a point where every company's like, hey, we've decided to treat the environment well. We're not going to pollute. We've on our own accord, we've just decided to do it, right? And this is probably, I feel it's less forever work, but you know, certainly in only the year I've been here, you know, that frustration. And I know when I attend some of those OSHA presentations and see what unregistered farm labor housing looks like, or see that they've provided a charcoal grill and said that's your kitchen, you know, is wholly unacceptable. Um, you know, so I think it is, you know, first of all, maybe I don't ever say this. I very much appreciate all of the work that you all do. Um, I know it is often thankless work, but it is important work. Um, and you know, it matters to me, and it's important to me. It's important to the people that are being helped, right? Um, and yeah, you know, part of me, when we talk about these problems, I want to take people aside and be like, let's talk about organizing, right? Let's talk about how we can better organize around these issues. Unfortunately, that's not my job, and I feel like I would get in trouble if I tried to organize you all against my own state agency, as much fun as that might be to do. But yeah, no, I think that not accepting what we have now is an important mentality. That fight is important. Um, and, you know, we cannot let our frustrations with the process let us forget that as frustrated as you might be, or as I might be about this process, like there are still, like you said, there are still people who are actually experiencing this every day, and that is their life. And so it's, let's be frustrated, but then tomorrow let's organize, right? Like that's I think the mentality I always appreciate, and I wish we didn't have to fight. I wish I didn't have a job that involved ag labor housing, so because it was all great, just the same way I wish there was no union reps, so because every company treated every employee well. But yeah, I I'm kind of getting a little soapboxy myself, but I do appreciate it. I do understand the frustration, having been on the receiving end for many years. I used to work on the Keystone XL pipeline in Nebraska, and that was just like, black eye after black eye of like feeling like nothing was happening. Um,
Can I interrupt for just a second then? Because I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
where you sit, Tim, is that, we're trying to figure out how to get these on-farm properties to a better place. I don't think we're going to get there or we'll all be dead before anything moves, right? So maybe what you can do is move more of the money away from on-farm, take it all away from on-farm. If they're not going to do it and there's no compliance, why are you going to add more and more costs to something that has never worked? And why can't DCBS and everybody else figure out ways that we can go ahead and use resources that might be in very rural areas, and we have to dig a well and do a septic system, even if it's an apartment complex out there, and find ways that community-based organizations can go out there and develop housing that might be a little bit more palatable, just humane than what they're getting right now. They're tied to the as Meg was saying, they're tied to the employer. They have no voice. They're, most of them are not documented, whatever it is. If we're not gonna, there's no sense in us going around and around and around. If that process, because that other side is going to be so negative, let's look for other ways to actually improve the lives of these farm workers. We eat that fruit and those vegetables every single day. And we just need to, if this process isn't going to work, let's look for another way to be able to redirect resources that allow for people to be housed in more decent land.
I totally in agreement with Lisa. Is exactly what I was just gonna say. Shall we change the tone of these meetings? Shall we spend less time talking about the growers and what they are not doing, and what can we do for affordable farm worker housing? What can you do, Tim, to not go against your agency, but to make sure that your agency understand you have been doing walking this path for this long. It's time to take a new look. Let the lawyers out there that knows law to fight with the growers and to keep doing what they do best. But I think we need to recap this group and say, hey, let's see how Oregon Housing Community Service can change their understanding and say, well, this is it. No more money for you. Community CBOs needs more money to take those people out of those on-site farm worker labor camps. Because again, I agree with Lisa, that's not humane.
Yeah, I don't think I can take away the on-farm piece of the ag housing tax credit. I think, and I think Peter spoke to this at one point, that just like it's so cost prohibitive to build in some communities, community-based farming or community-based housing in the state. I think he had mentioned like the Hood River, that it's just not possible. Um, so, you know, I, at the end of the day, um, you know, it's,
I'm just going to interrupt again. I just want
yeah,
you
yeah.
to start thinking actually, this facilitation team, you have a task force now. This facilitation team was created just like that task force was. It's supposed to have representation from all the different departments who don't show up. But why aren't we looking at how do we change some of the land laws that make it so expensive to do it in Hood River because it's all agriculture? Why don't we say if a community-based group wants to come in and buy some land, or even if you have good growers that are saying, look, we don't do housing, we'll donate some land and we can then develop on it, but it's going to be an EFU 80 or whatever, so we can make some modifications there. There are other things than just the money that can be done, that all of these organizations, the water, how do we get clean, good well water because it's got pesticides that have been dumped on it for years and years and years. So what are the things that department can do to help make this better? I just don't feel like this team, we have all these advocates here, and who we're missing are the people that can actually enact the change that will allow for a different way of thinking how to do this work.
Yeah, and I think that's the benefit the task force has, right? They have decision makers within all of these agencies, like the water resources, who specifically, talked about well water. Um, you know, so I think they are going to have a little bit more power, and obviously that task force, the governor has the ability to tell agencies, you're going to show up, right? Um, so I do think there is going to be that chance, and that ability to get the decision makers in the room, make some real recommendations, and then have those be implemented. So we're getting close. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So I very much appreciate the conversation we've had today. I have some homework. I have some questions I'm going to follow up on, such as, are the rest of those ALH meetings open to the public or for public comment? I'm going to follow with Chelsea on the timing of the study. I'm going to follow up with OSHA about the timeline for their rule advisories committee, and kind of when are we looking at for deadlines for recommendations. And then I'll kind of have some further discussions internally. And I think the one thing I would say about this task force is, I mentioned earlier, kind of as far as ideas, the sky is the limit. You know, um, we could make recommendations, like you said, that we, make changes to the Constitution and exclusive farm usage and, urban boundaries, urban growth boundaries, right? Because I know I was at a meeting with land use, et cetera, about those kinds of issues. The farmers had asked because I think they were struggling to get federal mortgages due to the EFU. Don't quote me on any of that. I'm trying to recall from a meeting I attended a few months ago. But like, those are the sorts of recommendations, right? I don't want anyone, when you're thinking about this ag labor housing task force, I don't want you to view it as a slightly better attended version of this, right? I think it is that opportunity to make some um, recommendations that may seem out of the, like, kind of out there, way out there, right? And maybe that's part of what you just said, right? Maybe we compensate a farmer for part of their land. We build community-based housing in some near joint growers, and we pay a CSO to run it, right? It's there's a lot of different kind of ideas. So don't feel boxed in. Don't feel like this is just another runaround. and maybe you're all more experienced with this aspect of state government, so maybe you're more cynical than me. But I do see this as kind of that the ability to opportunity to go out and kind of throw some really innovative ideas out there. So I think we're a little bit over. I want to thank all of you for attending. You should all have now invites through the rest of the year for these meetings. I thought I had actually done that. Apparently I had not. And I will be doing some intentional outreach to some of the agencies that are irregular attendees to get them a little more regular, get some more attending. You know, because it's, yeah, we all have to kind of work together to address this, right? We can't cut people out of the process. We can't do that, whoever they are. You know, at the end of the day, this is, you know, we're talking about farmers and their work and their livelihood. And, you know, most of these people aren't big, you know, I'm from the Midwest where we deal with, you know, farming companies that'll own a third of your state. Now you're not dealing with mom and pop operations, or you're not dealing with family farms. You know, we have to come to, you know, approach this together. You know, that's the only way we're going to get stuff done. And so, yeah, with that, I will let everyone go. It's, as always, it's very wonderful to see all of you. I'm hoping maybe sometime this year we can do some of these in person. I have started some of my tribal engagements in person, which are wonderful. Nothing for me is better to build a relationship than a nice handshake. Yeah, like I said, though, if anyone wants to follow up one-on-one, I'm more than happy to. And I'll get back to you all with some of this information by the next meeting. Okay. All right. Take care,
Yes.
everyone. Have
Thank
a
you.
wonderful day and a great weekend. All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tim.
Bye.